I did not say a word. I read the message twice, set my phone face down on the hotel nightstand, and walked to the window. Outside, the Gulf of Mexico was flat and silver in the early morning light. A pelican glided low over the water. I watched it until it disappeared behind the pier. Then I picked up my phone and read the message a third time. Gerald, we've talked it over and we've made our decision. You're retired now. The company is in good hands. Don't bother coming back to the office. We've already handled the transition. Enjoy your vacation, you've earned it. It was from my son-in-law. I put the phone down again. I did not throw it. I did not call him back. I did not call my daughter. I sat in the chair by the window, and I watched the Gulf, and I thought about the 31 years it had taken me to build Whitmore Catering and Events into what it was. I thought about the 2 refrigerated vans I started with. I thought about my late wife, Carol, packaging finger sandwiches at our kitchen table at 2 in the morning before a corporate luncheon. I thought about the first time we crossed $1 million in revenue and how she cried and I pretended I had something in my eye. I thought about all of that for maybe 10 minutes. Then I ordered coffee from room service, opened my laptop, and got to work. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I was not surprised. That is the part that people find hard to believe when I tell this story. They expect me to say I was blindsided, that I never saw it coming, that my daughter was always a good girl until she married the wrong man. But the truth is more uncomfortable than that. I saw the signs. I saw them clearly, and I chose to ignore them because she was my daughter, and I wanted to believe the best about her, and because I thought love was the same thing as loyalty. It is not. I know that now. My daughter married my son-in-law 6 years ago. He was charming, the way a salesman is charming. All eye contact and firm handshakes, and the ability to remember what you told him 3 months ago and bring it up at exactly the right moment to make you feel seen. My wife had passed 2 years before the wedding, and I think some part of me was just grateful that my daughter had someone. I was lonely. I did not examine him as closely as I should have. He came into the business 4 years ago. My daughter had been working with me for 3 years. By then, she knew the kitchen side, the client relationships, the seasonal rhythms of a catering operation. She was good at it. She had Carol's eye for detail, and my stubbornness, which is a useful combination in this business. When she asked if her husband could come on as operations director, I said yes. He had a business degree. He talked a good game about scaling, about systems, about taking Whitmore to the next level. I said yes. That is my error. I own it. For the first year, things were fine. He reorganized the driver schedules, and it saved us about $12,000 annually in overtime. I gave him credit for that. He started sitting in on client meetings, which I thought was fine. He started conducting client meetings without me, which I thought was a little much, but my daughter said he was just trying to take things off my plate, and I let it go. Then he started talking about a rebrand, a new logo, a new name. He wanted to drop Whitmore entirely. He said it sounded old-fashioned. That was the first real argument. I told him the name stayed. He smiled and said, of course. Absolutely. I understand completely. And then 2 months later, he brought it up again. This time with a presentation and a quote from a branding agency. I told him no a second time. He smiled again. My daughter stayed quiet during both conversations, and that silence told me something I did not want to hear. I want to explain why I still went on vacation. People ask me this. They say, if you already knew something was wrong, why did you leave? The answer is that I had not gone on a real vacation in 11 years. Not since before Carol got sick. The hotel in Clearwater was booked. My fishing buddy Ray had already driven down from Atlanta. I was 67 years old and I had spent 4 decades building something and I had earned 2 weeks on the water. And I told myself, I actually said these words out loud to myself in my truck on the way to the airport, they wouldn't dare. I was wrong. The text came on the 4th morning. Not from my daughter, from my son-in-law. The fact that it came from him and not from her told me the whole story before I even finished reading it. Here is what I did in the 4 hours after I read that message. First, I called my attorney. His name is Bernard, and he has handled my business affairs for 22 years. I told him everything. He said, Gerald, I need you to not do anything emotional for the next 48 hours. I said, "Bernard, I am the least emotional man you have ever met," he said. "I know. That is why I'm only asking for 48 hours. Second, I called my bank. The business accounts required dual authorization for transactions above $5,000. My son-in-law had lobbied to change this policy 8 months earlier, and I had said no. And now I understood why he had asked. I spoke to my personal banker and told her what was happening. She flagged the accounts. She told me someone had attempted to add a new authorized signatory to the primary operating account 3 days ago while I was already on vacation and that the request was pending review. I told her to reject it and to require my in-person signature for any further changes. Third, I called the 3 largest clients. Whitmore had a hospital network, a university, and a commercial real estate firm that used us for all their corporate events. I had personal relationships with the decision-makers at all 3. I did not tell them everything. I simply said I was reaching out to confirm that all contract communications should be directed to me personally for the foreseeable future, and that anyone representing Whitmore without my direct authorization should be treated with appropriate caution. All 3 of them said some variation of the same thing. "Actually, your son-in-law called us this week. The university contact said he had represented himself as the new CEO. The hospital contact said he had proposed renegotiating their contract terms. I thanked all 3 of them and told them nothing had changed. Fourth, I called Ray, who was waiting for me at the marina, and I told him I needed to use his truck and his Wi-Fi hotspot for a few days. Ray is a retired sheriff's deputy. He asked me one question: "Do you need me to come with you?" I said not yet. He handed me the keys without another word. I spent the next 2 days in my hotel room. I did not go fishing. I worked 18 hours a day. I went through every contract, every vendor agreement, every client account. I contacted our insurance carrier. I spoke to the landlord of our main facility, a 12,000 square foot kitchen and event space we had leased for 9 years, and confirmed that the lease was in my name, personally, not the business entity, because I had structured it that way when we signed. My son-in-law did not know that. I had never mentioned it because there had never been a reason to. I also did something that I am not ashamed of, though some people when they hear it think I should be. I called my daughter. She did not answer. I called 3 times. I left one message. I said, "I know you're there. I know you know what's happening. I want you to understand that what happens in the next few days is a result of choices that were made, and you still have time to make a different one. Call me back." She did not call back. I want to stop here for a moment and tell you something about my daughter, because this story is not really about my son-in-law. He was predictable. Men like him are always predictable, the ambition without the work. The desire for what someone else built without any interest in understanding how it was built or what it cost. He was a type. I had seen his type before. My daughter was something harder to explain. She was not a cruel person. I do not believe she started out intending to hurt me. I think she fell in love with someone whose ambitions were larger than his character, and then she spent years slowly convincing herself that his version of reality was the correct one, that I was old, that I was holding the business back, that they deserved more than I was giving them. When you hear something enough from someone you love, you start to believe it. That is not an excuse, but it is an explanation. On the morning of the 3rd day, I drove back to Clearwater, packed my things, checked out of the hotel, and drove the 4 hours home. I did not go to the office first. I went to see Bernard. We sat in his conference room for 2 hours. He had done his own research in the 48 hours since I called him. He told me that my son-in-law had filed paperwork with the state attempting to change the registered agent of the primary business entity. The filing was incomplete. He had not had access to all the required documentation, but the intent was clear. Bernard had already begun the process to have the filing rejected. He also told me that my son-in-law had approached a private equity contact about a potential acquisition of Whitmore, representing himself as the controlling partner. The contact, to his credit, had called Bernard's office to verify before responding. He had done this the previous morning. I looked at Bernard for a long moment. "How long do you think this has been planned?" I asked. Bernard looked at the ceiling. "Based on the sequence of the filings and the acquisition conversation, I would say they started planning this before you booked the vacation. I think they may have encouraged you to go." My daughter had been the one to suggest the Clearwater trip. She had sent me a link to the hotel. She had reminded me that Ray had been asking me to come down for years. She had said, "Dad, you need to rest. We can handle things while you're gone." I sat with that for a few seconds. Then I told Bernard to proceed. I arrived at the facility at 8:15 on a Thursday morning. I had called ahead to my head chef, Marcus, who had been with me for 14 years. I trusted Marcus completely. He was one of 3 employees who knew what was happening. When I pulled into the parking lot, there were 2 Clearwater Police Department vehicles parked near the entrance. I had made one phone call the previous evening to a detective I knew through a business association. The paperwork Bernard had prepared documenting the unauthorized filing attempts, the fraudulent representation to clients, and the attempted account takeover was sufficient. My son-in-law was in my office. He had moved things around. My photographs were off the desk. Carol's photograph, the one I had kept on that desk for 9 years, was in the bottom drawer. I stood in the doorway for a moment before he saw me. When he did see me, something moved across his face very quickly, just a flash, gone almost before it registered. Then he smiled. He actually smiled. "Gerald," he said, "I wasn't expecting you back so soon." "I know," I said. I stepped aside. The detective and one of the officers came in behind me. I did not watch what happened next. I walked to the drawer, took out Carol's photograph, and carried it to the kitchen to find Marcus. My daughter was not at the facility that morning. She was at their house, the house they had been living in rent-free, on a property I owned in Palm Harbor, which I had let them use when they married because I thought family helped family. I had a separate conversation with my daughter that afternoon, and that conversation is the one I do not talk about in detail. Not because it was ugly, though it was, because it was private. She is still my daughter. That is a fact that does not change, regardless of what she did. What I will say is this. She cried and she apologized and she said she did not know how it had gotten this far. She said she thought she was doing what was right for the business. She said my son-in-law had convinced her I was planning to sell the company and cut them out, and she had believed him because she wanted something that was hers, not just something borrowed from her father. I listened to all of it. I did not tell her she was lying. I did not tell her she was telling the truth. I sat across from her in her kitchen, and I looked at my daughter's face, and I tried to find something in it that I recognized. I found it. That was the hardest part. I told her 3 things. First, the house was mine, and she would need to find other arrangements within 60 days. I was not punishing her. I was drawing a line between what was mine and what I had chosen to share, because that line had not been honored. Second, she was no longer employed by Whitmore. She could come to Bernard's office and sign the separation paperwork at her convenience. Third, if she wanted a relationship with me, she knew how to find me. The door was not locked, but she would have to knock. She asked about her husband. I told her that was a question for an attorney. He was charged with attempted fraud, unauthorized practice as a business agent, and a separate count related to the misrepresentation to the private equity contact. He bonded out 2 days later. The charges are still pending, as of the time I am telling you this story. I am not going to predict outcomes. What I will say is that Bernard is thorough, and the documentation is complete. And I am not in a forgiving mood where the law is concerned. Now, I want to tell you about what happened with the business, because that is the part of this story that I think matters most. In the weeks after everything settled, I did a full audit of Whitmore, not just financial, but operational. Marcus and I sat down with the 2 other senior staff and we went through every process, every relationship, every number. What I found was that the business was in better shape than I had realized. My son-in-law had made a few smart operational changes in the early years, and then spent the next 2 years coasting on them and taking credit. The bones of Whitmore were strong because the bones had been laid down over 31 years, and nothing he did in 4 years had changed them in either direction. The hospital contract renewed, the university contract renewed. The real estate firm sent me a handwritten note from their director, who said she had been hoping I would call because she wanted to expand the relationship, not reduce it. I hired a new operations director, a woman named Patricia, who had run a similar business in Tampa for 15 years before her partner bought her out. She came with her own systems, her own instincts, and absolutely no interest in putting her name on anything that wasn't hers. She was exactly what I needed. I am not going to stand here and tell you this story had a clean ending. I have 2 fewer people in my life than I did before. My daughter and I are somewhere. I would not call us close. I would not call us estranged. We speak on the phone about once a month. The conversations are careful. They are not the conversations I thought I would be having with my daughter at this point in my life. And there is a grief in that which I carry quietly and do not put down. But here is what I know. I built something. I built it with my hands and my wife's patience and 31 years of early mornings and late nights and decisions that other people called cautious and I called careful. I built it, and it is still standing, and my name is still on the door, and Carol's photograph is back on my desk where it belongs. My son-in-law called me once from a number I didn't recognize, about 3 weeks after everything happened. I don't know what he intended to say. I let it go to voicemail. He did not leave a message. I went fishing with Ray the following month. We went out early, before the sun was fully up, and we sat in the boat in the quiet and I didn't say much. Ray didn't push. That is the thing about people who have actually been through hard things. They understand that sometimes sitting in silence on a boat in the Gulf of Mexico at 5:30 in the morning is not avoiding the subject. It is processing it in the only way that makes any sense. I caught a redfish about 2 hours in. Good size. I looked at it for a moment, and then I let it go. Ray asked me later why I didn't keep it. I thought about it. I said, I already have everything I need. He said that was the corniest thing I had ever said in 67 years of living. I told him he was probably right. On the drive home, I thought about what I would have done differently. I asked myself honestly. The answer I kept arriving at was the same one I did not like. I would have paid closer attention earlier. Not to my son-in-law, I could see him clearly enough once I chose to look. I would have paid closer attention to my daughter, to the small moments when her silence was louder than her words, to the way she stopped pushing back on things I knew she disagreed with. People do not go from who they were to who they become overnight. There are steps, and the people who love them are often the last to see them, because love and clear sight are not always the same thing. That is the lesson I took from this. Not that family cannot be trusted, that is too broad and too bitter, and I refuse to carry it. The lesson is narrower than that. The lesson is, pay attention. Love people with your whole heart, and then, separately, pay attention with your whole mind. Because the heart will forgive things the mind could have prevented, and once you understand the difference between those two things, you are a little less likely to end up reading a text message in a hotel room in Clearwater wondering where you went wrong. The business will be 32 years old in the spring. Marcus and I are planning a small dinner for the staff. Nothing elaborate. Just people who showed up and did the work and kept their word. I already know what I am going to say at that dinner. I am going to say that a business is just a collection of promises. Promises to clients, promises to employees, promises to yourself about what kind of person you intend to be and what you intend to build. When everyone keeps their promises, the thing grows. When they don't, you find out what was actually holding it together. What was holding Whitmore together was not my son-in-law's spreadsheets or my daughter's client relationships or any one thing. What was holding it together was 31 years of the same promise, made every single day, kept every single day. That is not something you can text away.